All right, we're gonna take a break, a short break from our in-depth conversation to get a little more spark for our thinking. We're lucky to have the Dean of the School of Education, Christopher Morphew, who's going to give us his insights. He's both a dean and a scholar of higher ed, so we are doubly welcome to have such good thoughts to be shared with us now.
Thanks, Bob. So I'll come up here. Everybody having a good morning thus far? Yes. So I met some of you in May, I believe, right? I was sitting at a table with a few. I'm trying to remember. There were some Alabama representatives there. I'm not going to get names, but there were a couple states that I remember. So that was good. So I appreciate you coming by and helping us out again here. I was just telling Bob and Joanna earlier this morning. I was at City Springs Elementary. I don't know, you're not from Baltimore, so you probably don't know anything about City Springs. City Springs is a school, it's a K-8 school in East Baltimore. And it is in one of the poorest areas of East Baltimore, which is one of the poorest areas of Baltimore. So if you can guess, it's one of the poorer areas in the whole country in terms of what you see for schools. Very challenging school environment. The principal there is one of our alums. She's doing incredible work. She and her teachers are doing incredible work. They're using restorative practices in a way I think that it was really engaging the parents and the students. She talks about parents who normally had come in wanting to fight some other parent who now come in and ask for a circle to talk with the other parents about the work they're doing and trying to engage. And the kids are respectful and well behaved, and they want to do the best they absolutely can. So it's a very positive culture coming in the school. And I was there because in every one of her classrooms, maybe not everyone, but the first time I visited the school, I've only been at Hopkins for about a year or so. The first time I visited the school, I noticed that every one of the classrooms was labeled with a college or university name on it. So there was Morgan State, there was Coppin State, University of Baltimore, there were, they sort of named the school. And I'm walking around the building and talking to people, and I don't see a Hopkins classroom. Right? Right? Exactly. So I said, we got to fix this. And Portira and my development folks, we got some T-shirts to the kids. We brought them some book bags today, and got a visit from the dean. And they get to wear their T-shirts the first Wednesday of each month. Right, so that's why we were there today. So a group of them had their T-shirts on and everything. And this school's doing much of what it should be doing in terms of getting these kids thinking about college as early as they can. I know that's what you're engaged in, although at a later level of life. They were asking me questions, and the reason I'm getting to this story, and I tend to tell longer stories than I should, they were asking me these incredibly articulate and insightful questions about college. They had them written down, and they were reading them aloud. We went around the room, they asked me questions. Class was completely African American. One of the first questions was, what's the success rate of African American students at Hopkins? Right? Not just how many are there, but what's the success rate? And I couldn't tell you. I couldn't answer the success rate. I guessed very close to the right number of the number of students we enroll at Hopkins. But I don't know what the success rate of African Americans. I don't know what that gap is. But that kid was right to ask that question because he wants to know, do kids like me succeed at Hopkins? Right? Another question, what kind of grants are available, right, to students who attend Hopkins? And I was able to talk about, I don't know, if you noticed in the newspaper recently, we got a very small gift from Mr. Bloomberg. We enroll graduate students in the School of Education, so that money's not coming to me, but I'm very thankful the university got it. So I was able to talk to them about that gift, and I was able to give them a guarantee that if you get into Hopkins, and I could say this with great certainty in this classroom, because Hopkins not only has need-based aid, but has programs. If you enroll in a Baltimore school, graduate from Baltimore school, and get in the door at Hopkins, it's going to be free to you. I said, if you get in, you're not going to have to worry about money. Right? Don't worry about grants. Don't worry, because one asked about student loan debt. Don't worry about that. That's not going to be you. Do your best. Do great work. Get in the front door. And of course, we all know that in that classroom of the 22 students or so I was talking to, the chances of them, one of them or more than one of them attending Hopkins is relatively small. I do think that there's the ability in that room to do the work. I just hope they can, demonstrate the numbers I'm getting into Hopkins are so nuts. I think 7% or something. The SAT scores are great. We all know this stuff. But the point is, these kids are thinking about and asking the right questions early on, and they deserve they deserve the fruits of the hard work that you're doing around early warning indicators and figuring out how do we provide successful pathways and pipelines to colleges for kids like those at City Springs who absolutely have the ability and deserve the opportunity to attend places like Johns Hopkins or places like College Park or places like Morgan State or wherever they're going to go, right? And it's a world apart for them. It's 5 miles away, but it's a world apart from them. And they need, schools need help in terms of identifying, what are the levers for preparation, what are the levers for access, and it's exciting that the work you're doing here. I'm very thankful you're here helping us do this. But Bob's work at CSOS is, I think, an exemplar of one of the great strengths of the School of Education, which is our research and practitioner partnerships, those collaborations that really bring impactful work to bear on how schools operate and how the nation operates. And you're a big part of that. You're out in the field, you're doing your work, and I appreciate you being here. So that's all I really wanted to say. I'm going to see you again, I think, in May. You're going to be back in May. And we're committed at the School of Education to this kind of work. Schools of education, I think, are rightfully criticized sometimes for doing work that isn't impactful. This is impactful stuff. We need to make sure that schools and beyond schools, post-secondary institutions are really providing students with the tools they need to succeed. And there's so much evidence that if we provide students with those tools, that we can elevate and meet these state standards on getting the 60% plus of their population into post-secondary institutions. So thank you for being here.
And before you get out the door, I'm going to take advantage of being here and ask one question, both of the dean and the scholar of higher ed. Philip, who is one of the best DC handicappers, tells us there's some odds the higher ed reauthorization act might actually happen in the next couple of years.
I've heard that before.
There's a pipeline. And one of the things we've been struggling with, or not struggling, but having to think through, is that one of the pathways many kids will take will be to open access 4-year schools or 2-year community colleges, many of which now, because of changes in the economy and the fact that we haven't built a lot of more schools, actual school universities in a while, are quite full. But they're full with relatively low graduation rates. And at some level, their bottom line is because they have kids, they're not so pressured as you might think they might be with those graduation rates. So the question is, what incentive might we think about? Because we're talking about, they have to actually, we know that to increase these pathways, some of their behaviors as an organization have to change. How they ask kids to take certain developmental classes or tests, what kind of guidance they give them, what kind of structured pathways they provide. That's work. So how might we think about incentivizing that work when maybe the most bottom line economic incentive isn't there?
Yeah, and I guess, and I'd also add to that context that Bob was just painting for us here. I'd add the context when the recession comes, and I think it's coming sooner, probably sooner than we wanted to. Those schools are going to be fuller, right? There's going to be more people, so there's going to be even less incentive for them to change, right? If in fact you're looking at a 25-30% 4-year, 6-year graduation rate at an institution, but you've got plenty of students, why exactly would I change? And if you think about, I've written a little bit about both state funding as well as performance-based funding models. And I'm not generally a fan of performance-based funding models. A majority of U.S. states now have these in place. But if you think about the way that, we fund state higher education systems, it's backwards. Right? Our goal is, if you listen to governors and if you listen to workforce development folks and economic development folks, they talk about these goals and visions of getting 60% plus of their citizens, their residents, with some kind of post-secondary degree, whether that's a 2-year or 4-year. 60, I think, is a pretty normal kind of Midwestern goal to aim for, right? Some states might be lower, some states might be slightly higher, but 2/3 of the population having a post-secondary degree would be wonderful in states. And then you look at how we fund higher education systems and you go, well, that's just backwards, right? Because if we provide with between 529 plans, between merit-based programs, between funding formulas that reward institutions, research-based institutions that are more expensive to educate students who get better quality students. The money goes disproportionately to them. So the funding system's backwards, right? It's exactly the opposite of how you would decide if in fact your goal is to take students who otherwise wouldn't get into higher education and make sure they get in and succeed and graduate from a higher education institution. So all that said, and there's a lot of organizational and financial inertia to fight against there, that's the context. But I think using the lever of performance-based funding, because states, legislators, business folks really like those things. They like the idea of incentives that are behind certain behaviors, certain motivators for college universities. And to be very clear, there's very little evidence that they've worked in the ways that they want them to work, right? But that hasn't stopped states from implementing them. Right? But you could imagine, and part of the reason they don't work is because they're not pulling on the right levers. I would argue that it just encourages creaming, some other things that we do, that institutions do, that isn't very effective. But if in fact your goal is 60% of your residents graduating, why not incentivize a number of things? Students, some of the students from underrepresented backgrounds, students who are less likely to succeed, incentivize them to enroll in institutions with higher graduation rates, right? What are the ways to think about doing that? Are there financial aid mechanisms, right? Are there incentives at the flagship universities to go after these students because they come with increased funding, right? Particularly if they succeed. What are the incentives at the two in the four-year institutions in a state, the public institutions in a state that maybe have lower graduation rates? What are the incentives for them? If in fact the students come in, they succeed or they don't succeed, and there's another 4 students behind them in line, then there's no incentive for finishing them, right? But if in fact you lose a student at sophomore year or at junior year and there is some disincentive, right? Or the student becomes more valuable to you as they progress through the pipeline, right? So that you get more funding for students who are in their 4th year or have earned, or who are completing 15 credits a semester, which we know is very important, or beyond 90 credits, right? So the funding actually accompanies those students, and you want to work hard to keep those students. You can imagine institutions responding in very positive ways to the student who otherwise might not have succeeded, but now we really don't want the student to fail because the student means a lot to us financially. And if we can enroll 300 more of those students, wow, that'll make a difference in our bottom line. So I think getting those students first and foremost at 2 institutions where they're going to succeed, and that's very, very hard because some of the institutions, in some public institutions in the country that have some of the lowest graduation rates in the country are institutions that are very, very hard to change and even harder to eliminate. And for good reason. Some of them are HBCUs, some of them are HSIs that serve populations that have been underserved traditionally. But if you can get those students who would otherwise attend those institutions to attend more institutions with higher graduation rates, that would be a positive. But I also think performance-based systems that cause us to think about how do we fund these institutions and think, are we actually incentivizing in any way institutions to recruit the students who we need to access and graduate from these institutions if we're going to hit those bellwether marks. So those would be some things I would think about. Okay, thanks guys.